Welcome, everybody. I have a full house here to discuss The Rejection That Changed My Life by Jessica Bacal. 25 plus powerful women on being let down, turning it around, and burning it up at work. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks for having us.
So I have Jessica Bacal, the author and compiler, perhaps, of this whole book, Chelsea Kline and Polly Rodriguez. So I would love for you guys to discuss how you got involved with this project and what rejection you shared. So why don't I actually start with Chelsea and Polly, and then I'll go on to Jessica and find out about the whole project in and of itself.
Great.
Sure. You want me to start?
I want you to start.
Good morning. I'm so excited to be here. It's really nice to meet you, Zibby. So my name is Chelsea Kline, and I know Jess from, I think, from living in the same town in Northampton, and we have a connection through Smith College, and just being women in the same town and being interested in similar things. So the story that I shared was about how I ran for state senate and didn't win, and how the value of putting oneself out there and not getting what one wants is pretty tremendous, because I think a lot of people sort of think, what if, I don't get the thing that I want? I would be so mortified. I'd be so embarrassed. And I did that. and I'm still standing. And it was really powerful for me to be able to share that story in Jess's book, and to find like so much camaraderie as I read this book, like, I'm not alone. And and it's really heartening. That book is so comforting. It's so powerful. And I really think it's actually revolutionary.
I agree. And like all the sections on different women, everybody has their lessons learned at the end and things that you can take away, all of which are completely actionable and amazing. So what was one of yours? What's your favorite one that you shared? Do you even remember in the book?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking you. Sorry, I know this is tricky with multiple people.
I think my favorite one, honestly, I'm really starstruck that Polly Rodriguez is here, but I'm also really smitten with Loretta Ross. There's so many stories in here that were people that I admire, and that people that I knew about already that I was really excited about, and just hearing sort of like the flip side, or the warts and all, or like the real, the real truth behind their success. It was like just so comforting and so calming, like, oh, we're all human. And I really think that, there's these male or like traditional models of ambition, right? Which is like, don't let anyone see you sweat. And this book is really turning all of that on its ear, because we're saying we are sweating, like, breaking down barriers and being ambitious is really sweaty work when you're a woman, especially if you're a woman of color, you're from a marginalized background. And it's really powerful to say that this is hard, and I'm falling down, and I'm dusted up, and I scrape my knees, and I'm getting up, and I'm doing it anyway. And that's what I mean. Like, this book is so revolutionary and so powerful and so important, because we're breaking barriers by just talking about these things. I'm so grateful to Jess for writing this.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Jess, I found it so interesting in your introduction how some people wouldn't even admit to their mistakes, and for your last book too, that they didn't even want to go there. They were like, well, I don't want to admit, right?
Yeah. There was someone I talked to on the phone. She was considering being interviewed for the book, but she said, I really don't like the word rejection. Are you sure you're going to have rejection in the title? And I was like, yeah, I am. I'm going to have rejection in the title.
By the way, you totally inspired me. And I think it's because I've been reading this book, now to prep for today. And I just launched this new podcast called Moms Don't Have Time to Have Sex. And I got it all ready to go. And then I got this email from Apple Podcasts, and it was like rejected. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was rejected by Apple Podcasts. And at first I start freaking out, and I was like, well, forget my book launch, forget my podcast launch, just forget it, even though it's up on other channels. And then I was like, wait a minute, this could be the rejection that changed my life. This is an opportunity to like do better with iHeartRadio, or like, now I can see the flip side of it. So, and then I was going to hide it. And instead, now in all the materials, I'm like, not on Apple. I was rejected. So anyway, that was all you. It was all this book and the timing of it and everything. So
I really appreciate that. I love that. And I do think that kind of modeling is so useful for other people, that you're willing to put that out there, I think is great.
Well, thank you. See, you're already changing lives. Just one reader. And here we go. Okay, Polly, would you mind introducing yourself and sharing what you contributed to the book?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Polly Rodriguez. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Unbound, which, speaking of sexuality, is a sexual wellness company with the goal of taking an entire category of products spanning vibrators, lubricants, and accessories, as well as content that is educational, but also relatable, mainstream through just affordable pricing and innovative design. And I think being vulnerable and being open about the realities of what it takes to get to where you are is something I'm super passionate about, because when I was first starting the business, I was in debt. I felt like I was failing every day, and it was a really isolating experience. And so being transparent about how hard that is with other female founders on a more intimate scale was really empowering for me, which I think is a word that is often abused, but it was just something that I felt so much less alone when I realized that it was difficult for everyone, not just me. And so I was really excited by the book. I've loved reading it. And I think it goes back to just acknowledging that, like, it's not super easy for anyone, and everyone is facing battles and struggles, and you just don't know what the other person's going through until you read a book like this.
It's almost like you have to go through these rejections, and yet people feel like you're not supposed to take these little pivot or not pivot, misdirection, like detours. But that it's not even a detour. Like, you have to get rejected in order to, like, if somebody didn't have any rejections their whole career, that would be nuts, right? I bet they wouldn't have as rich an understanding of, or even an appreciation for where they've gotten to after all that. And back to Jess, finally, as we circle around here. Tell me about starting this book. Tell me about how your experience at Smith and trying to start your own program and sort of failing, and then your reconsideration of if you even really wanted it. Tell me about that whole thing and how this book came to be.
Yeah. Well, so at Smith, where I've worked for over a dozen years, there was a reorganization. And in the process of the reorganization, I applied for a bigger job at the college. And just like, here's an anecdote to show you how nervous I was. I hired a speaking coach to like coach me on my job talk. And on this one day that I practiced my job talk with her, I also drove back to campus where I'd assembled all these colleagues to also listen to me give a job talk. I parked my car, I did that, then I went to work. And when I came back to my car at the end of the day, I'd left my motor running for 6 hours. Like, I was just so anxious and distracted. And then I didn't get the job. And it was humiliating because I had to then go tell that speaking coach and those colleagues I'd assembled and all the people who wrote references for me and people who knew me and had interviewed me. So I was humiliated, but even as I was learning that I hadn't gotten this job, I felt this little sense of relief. And I was like, what is that about? Maybe I actually didn't want this job. And that experience made me wonder if rejection was maybe more complex than we think of it as being. And I wondered if it would be interesting to gather women's stories about rejection. And I was interested in women in part because Smith is a historically women's college. I work with young women, and in part because I think women are socialized to be approval seeking. And so it was interesting to me to talk to people about, what happened when they hadn't gotten that approval. And so it was an amazing opportunity to get to talk to powerful people like Chelsea and Polly, and to then, after kind of accumulating all these interviews, to think about, well, what are the lessons that that are emerging? And, I'll just, with Polly, for example, she was able to use rejection as data. I think you'd agree with this, Polly. She pitched her company Unbound at, she applied to these large pitch competitions in big cities at first, and it wasn't working out because people mostly men, didn't really understand her product, and but she took that data that, okay, maybe the big competitions aren't going to work out, and she went to smaller cities and smaller competitions, and that's where she started to get her funding. Another important lesson from the book, I think, is that rejection tolerance is a muscle. And I think Chelsea's story really demonstrates this, because Chelsea, she put herself out there as someone who'd never run for office. And she had to go door to door, introduce herself, and just deal with, like, some people weren't interested. Some people in our town weren't going to vote for her, but she pushed through. And she says something, and I think you say in your story, Chelsea, like, someone had told you at the end of it, like, okay, you're made of steel, like you could walk through fire now. You've really done it. And I do think that there's a strength that comes from experiencing, I think, the small rejections that you have to experience on a campaign, but then also the larger rejection that you experienced after, actually getting a ton of support, voter support, but not winning the election.
This is like when I had twins. I mean, this is a million years ago now, but when they would cry like uncontrollably, and I would always feel like I was doing something wrong, and the doctor was like, no, it's okay, because when they're crying like this, they're building up their lungs, and you're making them into better people. This might have been completely not true, by the way. Now that I say this out loud, having not thought about it for like 14 years, it was probably a lie. But anyway, in other words, there's always some sort of silver lining to it. You're building up something as you're failing something else. So I don't know. After Polly and Chelsea in particular, after you got over sort of those pitfalls or failures, or how did you keep going? Like, Polly, what made you not say, oh, okay, well, I was rejected at this conference, forget it, I guess I had a bad idea? And how did you pick yourself up, Chelsea? Like, what happens after?
Yeah, I mean, so we went out to raise like a seed round of funding, and it took, you read all these stories in the press of, I had this idea, I wrote it down on a cocktail napkin, and then all of a sudden VCs were just like fighting over giving me money. And I think because that wasn't my experience, it forced me to really focus on the business and figure out, okay, what part of this feedback is valid that I should incorporate and really consider. And it taught me how to just be really honestly critical and not take things so personally, where I was able to say, okay, that feedback is valid, and I should probably think about how to incorporate and change it, versus that is just someone that's afraid of what we do and the stigma. And I think, me personally, I hadn't found it in myself starting a business in sexuality. Like, I grew up in the Midwest. My parents were very taken aback when I told them that this is what I wanted to do. And I realized that I was internalized, like a lot of the failure that was happening was reflective of stuff that I hadn't worked through internally. And so for me, it kind of taught me how to look at things more objectively and not take them so personally. And then on the other side of that, it was about building community and being around other women who are going through something similar, so that you didn't feel like it was just you going through that on your own. But it's tough, and it's not perfect. And it's definitely a linear line where like point B is higher than point A, but it's, got a curve that goes up and down every day. So I try to remember that where I feel on that curve will change day to day, but ultimately it's a net positive movement, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. I love that. And how about you, Chelsea? How did you pick yourself up?
Well, I think for me, I had been in spaces where I had helped encourage other women to run for office, and I had been really involved in that. So part of it for me was about like really walking my walk. And then once I actually ran, I had so much deeper of a perspective on what it actually means to run for office, and really understanding what a tremendous privilege it is to run for office. So it felt really important to me to translate my failure into, or my lack of winning, whatever you want to call it, into something positive to help other people run. Like using what I had learned to really talk about the privilege that you need to be able to run for office, and also like kind of the nuts and bolts, right? Like, so now I feel this tremendous responsibility to help other women run for office, and to share my story, and to talk about the fact that I ran by the skin of my teeth and, you know, had to call everyone I knew and ask them for $5 to help me run. So I wasn't like the traditional candidate. So I really felt like my story was really important and that I could help other women. And that to me, like just shifted everything, because if I can help somebody, you know, demystify the process, if I can really explain sort of the nuts and bolts, if I can be a resource for someone, then it makes it all worth it, right? Because I'm not just sitting back going, oh, you should run, you should run. I'm saying, hey, I did it, and it was really, really hard, and also really worth it, and I'm really glad I did it, and it completely kicked my butt, and let me help you do it too. The more that we can, like, you know, normalize running and not winning, the more that we can normalize jumping into campaigns, even if you're not perfect and you don't have all the right experience, then I think the more that we're going to be working for actual equality, right? like so those are the most important things to me. And with that being said, I mean, the more that I can share my story, I think the more that I can help people. So I'm actually like working really hard to do that in a more formal way and launching my own podcast that talks about women running for office and all those things. So like this has really become part of like my career, you know, trajectory, and like part of my DNA of like, it's okay to fall down. We all do it sometimes.
And what's your podcast called?
It's called Galvanized. And it's interviews with women who have run for office, women who have won and not won, and women who've been campaign managers, and really working for like, how do we get more women to run? So it has like a real, you know, strong educational push to it.
I just chatted with a woman named Julie Menon here on the Upper East Side of New York, and she's running now, and she's never run for office before. Anyway, I feel like I should put you in touch because she has 4 kids and she's like amazing. She's running for controller or something that it's not the mayor, but she's like, no, I'm not doing the mayor race, but this is what I think I can do. And anyway, she was so impressive. So I should put you in touch.
Oh, yes, please.
I feel like she could use you. I mean, for sure.
I'll turn her on.
All right. And also I just interviewed recently Mark Shriver, who wrote 10 Hidden Heroes, and you know, anyway, he had lost a race also after being in the Maryland state legislator for like 2 decades. And he was talking about that as one of his most profound moments in life, was getting over that rejection, and said that he was, you know, it was a very, very close race, and he like couldn't believe it. The next morning he went to brunch with his son and his wife and was just like feeling so defeated and everything. And I guess they had been singing the song "It's a Beautiful Day" by U2. It was that time of life. And they walked out of this diner, and his son jumped in front of him when he was all downcast and everything and just said, "Dad, it's a beautiful day." And he was like, "Oh, you're right." And literally starts like crying, telling me, because he's like, that's what it's about. So I feel like it's like whatever you can use in your toolbox to remember what's important, and that these are temporary moments, you know, that they are just little dots on the whole sort of timeline of life. They're not like the end of any sort of timeline. Anyway, you all know this. I don't know why I'm summarizing it, but yes.
I'm glad that you bring that up though, because I feel like having your kids witness those sort of ups and downs that you mentioned, I think that's so incredibly poignant. And I think actually for my kids, I think that was the most painful part of my running, was seeing my kids' reactions to it. I was a teen mom, so I have a 20-something kid now, and she was really active in my campaign. And then I have a 13-year-old, and they were so heartbroken that I didn't win. And that like really, really hurt me. But it also felt like such a great thing to model for my kids. It's like, we do the best we can, and sometimes it doesn't work out and we still have to carry on. But that was like, I really felt like I was like, I'm soldiering on, everyone. I'm saying the things I'm supposed to say, but I was also like, this hurts. This is sad. And like, that's human, right? Like it felt, you know, it was a lot, but it was good.
Yeah, I think it's a great lesson for kids. You know, I think it's amazing that they were able to witness that and see you get through it. Yeah.
And Jess, what other pieces of, I mean, you have so many takeaways. Your book is like chock full of them, but I really liked that the difference between how you handle it is how you rebound, essentially, right? It's not just the rejection or how big the rejection is. It's like the ability to pick yourself up and keep going, right? The resilience or grit or whatever you want to call that. How do you think some people just like have that more than other people, that ability? Like, are you born with that, the ability to kind of like bounce off the ground, you know, quicker than others? Or you think it's a skill that we all have to acquire? What do you think?
I mean, I think some people might be naturally more resilient than others, but I definitely think it's something we can practice and acquire. And actually, one of my favorite moments in the process of developing this book was interviewing Angela Duckworth, who is the seminal researcher on grit. She is a psychologist at University of Pennsylvania. And I loved hearing her say that when she gets rejected or when she's struggling, she tells everyone in her lab, she's talking about it all the time. And she said something like, more tears have gone into my husband's shirt collar than you could imagine. So just knowing that the researcher on grit also cries when she gets rejected, that was very comforting to me, and I do think that it's not that we don't feel badly when we're rejected. I think it's okay. I think a lot of women in the book talked about the importance of feeling your feelings, but then you can do these other things like taking the long view, seeing rejection as data. Polly talked about not taking things so personally, but having this curiosity about the rejection, viewing it with a little more distance, and building these muscles, modeling for other people that rejection is part of life, and you can move on. I also learned that rejection, researchers are finding it sparks creativity. It can spark creativity, so that was encouraging too.
I love, by the way, when you were describing Angela Duckworth, that you were like, oh, and by the way, she's really funny. Because you just wouldn't know. I love when you just like get to know, because in my mind, she's like this sort of legendary, advice guru and, founder of this psychological movement. And you're like, no, actually, she's like hilarious. So
yeah, she's so formidable seeming, but yeah, she's very
formidable. And also Alicia Reiner, who's actually in my book group, my Zibby's virtual book group. I got to know her in the pandemic, and now she comes most weeks, and we've she's talked to my husband about different projects. Anyway, that whole thing too, because as actresses, or actors, I should say, excuse me, they face rejection constantly. And so she had to get involved in other things like producing and directing, or what, all these other pivots that people have to do. How did you connect with everybody in the book?
Well, some people were people I knew, like Chelsea. And then there were a couple of other Smith alumni. So, I think a nice thing about getting older is, these young people, like my former assistant at Smith, Allie, she was my assistant in my office, but she went off and became a rock star. So she's the bassist for Potty Mouth, and she lives in LA. And so I was like, Allie, can I interview you? And so some people were people like that who I knew, but some people were like people I just found online who seemed interesting. I just Googled and cold emailed, and Polly is an example of that. I emailed her office and asked if she might be willing, based on some things I'd read online, panels she'd been on, things she'd written, and she was willing to talk. And then, there were definitely a lot of no's as well.
You could write a whole book about the rejection of the women rejecting you for being in the book.
Exactly.
Yeah, that'll be part 2.
Yeah.
What about men?
Yes. What about them?
Right? No, I'm just asking, like, what about their experience of rejection? I don't know. I'm thinking about like my sons and, what they're going to have to face too. And I don't know. I mean,
yeah, I do think that this is a book for everyone, and that, it's not, I was so interested with my first book, which was about mistakes. One of the first times I had people read it, I gave some sections to students from Amherst College and Smith. And UMass, we were in a workshop together, I was leading. And the young male students responded really well. They found it really inspiring and helpful. So I definitely think that anyone could read this book. I was more interested in interviewing women because it was women's stories that had inspired me personally. When Elizabeth Bell, who's in the book, is someone I knew in my own life. And, she was rejected from medical school 17 times, and that was inspiring to me. But, I think men, I don't know. I don't think that men and women, when I think about men and women and rejection, there's a myth that women are less likely to take risks than men. And I don't think that's true. I think it's equal. I mean, there was a big meta-analysis that came out of Boston University a couple of years ago. This researcher looked at all these studies on women and risk taking and found that there's actually a 95% overlap in men and women and risk taking, but it's like those differences get magnified because that's what catches the attention of journals when people send things out to publish. I do think women are more ruminative, like we're more likely to turn things over and over in our minds and feel badly and wonder what could we do differently. And so, that's another reason why I think this book might be especially useful for women.
I have to say, I loved the way you wrote it, that you were just it was like talking to a friend. I loved it. I felt like I knew you before you and your dogs, and just like how you introduced also every chapter instead of just like putting the story out there. Like, I don't know if that was a conscious decision in the writing process or not, but I loved that. And I was thinking, like, I produce these anthologies occasionally. I'm like, oh, I should do that. I should like put a little intro paragraph because it gives everything such a better context. So anyway, I just loved how you did that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun.
And the exercises in the back too, by the way, those were like so huge. I was like, I have to go back and like sit and do some of them because
yeah, those are based on activities that I've done with my students at Smith over many years, and they include poems we've used that I actually got in touch with these poets to ask, can I put your poems in the book? And it was so wonderful because I was able to tell them, I've been using your poems as prompts with students for years. Those were really cool conversations. And I think that there's one exercise that invites people to write about themselves in the third person. And that's useful, to kind of, that's one way of getting some distance from a rejection, for example.
One thing that when I was first I went to this writing class, this is years and years ago. And Susan Shapiro, who's ended up being on my podcast, said, okay, well, you can't take it personally when you get rejections for pitching articles. You're going to get rejections. Assume you're going to get 10. Get a spreadsheet going, put a line in. As soon as the first rejection comes in, great. You've started filling up your chart. Go on to just get it ready and send it out again. And it's such a great mentality because you don't even have time you shouldn't even think about it. Like, okay, this race is over, done. Like this VC passed, great. I'm going to the next one on my list and I'm not even going to stop to cry. It doesn't mean anything. It's just like, that wasn't the right thing. So
yeah,
I think it's a good sort of approach to many tasks in life.
Yeah, having a system like that, I think it provides almost a structure to have the kind of remove that you need to persevere through something like sending out, articles. Yeah.
So what parting advice would all of you have, even about writing this book, by the way, Jessica, and like writing books in general, and the fact that you went back to like pursue the PhD after getting rejected, like all these things, what would your parting advice be to either aspiring authors or people just who have been knocked down and are struggling to get back up again? Now I should put that song. Do you know what I'm talking about? I get
yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll spare you. Okay. What's your
knocked down? Yeah.
You should make a playlist for the book.
I know. I've thought, yes.
You should do that Spotify playlist. Anyway, okay. What would your advice be, all three of you? Jessica, you go first.
I'll give advice for writing. I mean, I feel sometimes I have this one friend who's a writer. I love her books. And she's a novelist. Her novel is The Optimistic Decade. It's a great novel. And sometimes I feel like I wouldn't even be writing if it weren't for her. Like I'm doing this, to get her approval. I know it's not really true, but it's like, it's been so helpful to have her encouragement, to have her read my writing, to just talk about writing with her. And so I would say, like, if you have one writer friend, that can really help you.
Love it. And I think that having the community in the times of rejection are also so important. So it's like a multifunctioned.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
You need that crash pad, if you will.
Yeah.
All right, Chelsea.
I think using our failures and our rejections as a way to help other people is sort of takes the sting out of it. And back to your earlier question about what about men? I mean, this work really transcends gender because it's about making ambition and making our successes more human and more real and more collaborative. And it's about sharing knowledge. And that can help everybody. And that can make, our professional workplaces and our communities more humane and more inclusive and kinder.
Love it. Polly, how about you?
Yeah, I would just say the thing I've learned through startups and endless rejection is that if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. Like it's hard for a reason. And if you feel, I've learned this only like over time, but if you feel like you're failing every day, it means you're doing something that's really difficult, and it doesn't feel that way. But for me, it's like the moment I feel safe and comfortable, I'm like, oh, I'm not growing anymore. I'm not. So I think the most helpful thing for me has just been to have the context of like, if you are being rejected, it means you're doing something that's difficult and worthwhile. Because if you never got rejected, then it means you're never trying anything that really pushes you in a new way that you'll grow. So yeah, I look at rejection as a good thing.
I love that, Polly. If we're not being rejected, then we're just stagnant, right? It's awesome.
Yeah.
Although,
And then you get to go back and win. And, I was single for like 6 or 7 years when I first moved to New York. And I remember like dating was very similar, where I'd go on all these dates and get rejected all the time. But I finally started going into the mindset of like, well, either it'll be a good date or a good story. And kind of just looking at it from that perspective of like, either it'll turn out the way I want, or I'll get a badge of honor for, muddling through it.
Yes. I think
it all into a learning opportunity, as like the preschool teachers might say. I love that. Well, this has been so fun. Okay, so Chelsea, I'm going to put you in touch with Julie, and Polly, I would love to talk to you about my new podcast, which I launched today. Moms Don't Have Time to Have Sex. And if there's something maybe we could do together, that would be really fun.
Yeah.
And
I can't believe Apple rejected it, Zibby. That's so crazy to me.
Right. And it's very tame. It's just for like normal moms who just have like secret questions, it's not like very racy or anything, but anyway, who knows? We'll see. And Jessica, if you do another book about rejections, I have like 1,000 I could share. So, like everybody else, I'll have to get in line. But anyway, it was so nice to meet you all, and congratulations. I really loved the book. It's so great. And the perfect gift when anybody's feeling down too, for anything to happen. So thanks for the bow. That saves me a wrapping paper. That's perfect. Okay. It was great to meet you all. Have a great day.
All right, Zibby, thank you.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye-bye.